Welcome to a football show, Thursday edition. That is Zach Lyons. I am Braden Gall. And, of course, we are brought to you by Sinkers Beverages. You can see the logo right there on the hat. They have very slick gear. They've got cool hats and stuff, so you can go in there and check them out. We do appreciate all you guys jumping in to the comment section. If you would like to ask questions, we've got some time for some Q&A like we always do with you folks in the comment section there. If you're on YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're on Twitter, give us a share. Engage. If you're on Facebook, give us a like and a share and all that good stuff as well. Team Ramrod already into the comments. It's fun to watch press conferences and coach interviews. Or is it fun? I think there's a question in that question mark there. I don't know.
Exactly I think it's because it has not been fun for quite some time.
Okay. I see what you're doing there. And obviously we had a lot of people talking today, including the director of sports performance, Zach Woodfin, was out there. Of course, Chris Harris and Frank Bush and Brian Callahan, Will Levis, everybody out there talking today as rookie camp will open tomorrow on Friday. Get a chance to go check them out. So we will kind of preview what we're looking forward to seeing over the course of the weekend at rookie camp. Also, lots of details from the talking today. And I think that's ultimately
fun
your point.
And informative.
to your point and to Team
like
Ramrod's
Schoolhouse
point.
Rock.
Yes, we got details. Specifically, Treylon Burks ran 3,591 yards. Yesterday in
one
practice,
which is what he was running with the Tennessee Titans when he saw the field, because they just had him doing aerobics, last year. He's out there just doing, just running laps out in the field last year. Hopefully this year, maybe it results in actual targets, but we'll see.
Yes, exactly. Hello from Memphis. Tighten up, says Carlos. And of course, Chris Cross says, did anyone catch the bit from Levis about the environment being one where people can be more outspoken now? I didn't hear him say it is more outspoken, but I did hear him say he feels comfortable talking to his coaches and voicing his opinions. There was a lot of interesting questions today, but again, lots of intrigue, interest, details, all that kind of good stuff. Hello from St. Louis as well. What is up, DP? There you go. So do appreciate all you guys jumping in and hanging out. We'll talk Tyler Boyd, of course. We'll talk Treylon Burks. We'll talk the impact of everything that was said today during those press conferences, storylines that you and I are looking forward to, and, of course, some rookie camp stuff. So a lot to do today on the show. Sinkers Beverages, again, Nashville's best #1 liquor store in East Nashville. Bluegrass Beverages up in Hendersonville, their sister store, one of the two best liquor stores in the city or just outside of. Please shop at Bluegrass and at Sinkers. Support good local businesses because they are here supporting us, giving you guys good original independent content. The Kingston Group, of course, buildkg.com. You guys know the deal. They are Nashville's locally owned custom home and remodeling firm. It is a firm, Zach. It is a nose-to-tail operation, sort of like whole hog Memphis barbecue, right? Like it's a nose-to-tail operation out there with the Kingston Group. So make sure you call them before you do anything with your house. I know you spent a lot of time on Tyler Boyd with Mike on Football and Other F Words, so make sure you go check that out. Obviously, Stacking the Inbox as well, stackingtheinbox.com. But Tyler Boyd coming in at about Brian Callahan said today he's not officially signed the paperwork, but it does appear that at a $4.5 million price tag, the Titans went out and got a guy that plays the slot and is a guy that, is a great locker room guy, according to Brian Callahan. He fills a role for the team. He pushes all the receivers down. We'll talk about all the impacts, but just your initial thoughts when you saw the number.
Yeah, it's exactly kind of what I thought it would. I know you wanted to pay him like $11 million and stuff, and thought he was going to be around 7 or 8 and all this stuff. But this is about what Tyler Boyd is worth. He's a 29-year-old slot-only receiver who has no explosion, but he does bring a lot of stuff to the table. I think one of the things that you talked about in wanting to overpay him or making the case to overpay him was that he has experience in this system. And one of the first things Will Levis says, that he texted Tyler Boyd and says, I can't wait to learn this system from you. All the ins and outs and nuances and all this stuff. And I think that tells you a lot about Will Levis, that he initially, instinctively reaches out and is willing to learn and knows that would be a great guy to learn from. But it also tells you how well respected Tyler Boyd is based on his reputation across the league. And I'm sure some of that is probably some of the Will Levis's initiative comes from probably urging from Brian Callahan a little bit, or maybe based on information Brian Callahan has told Will Levis what to expect and everything. But Will Levis has also watched a lot of film on Tyler Boyd. So, I mean, it's really great. And I think that Mike put it best. And I also likened it to my whole draft process feelings on Ladd McConkey. If Calvin Ridley was not here, the Tyler Boyd signing, it doesn't really move the needle or help anything. I mean, it helps, but it doesn't, right? It doesn't solve your big issue, right? Now, if you would have drafted, Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors or someone that could play on the outside, if instead of drafting Calvin Ridley, then Tyler Boyd deal makes sense. But a lot of people's like, oh, just get Tyler Boyd, and you had Tyler Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins, and a rookie. Well, I mean, it's fine, but it's not the best way to go about it. And I think the Titans, throughout this whole process, outside of Jaquan Jackson, have done a really good job of evaluating their strengths, weaknesses in the wide receiver room and filling those holes appropriately with the right compensation for everybody. I mean, the problem is that DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd are only on a 1-year contract. So you're kind of in this. The Titans cannot escape the circle, man. Next year, guess what they'll need? 2 more free wide receivers, more than likely. And it's been the same thing for 4 or 5 years. So I don't know. Hopefully that maybe DeAndre Hopkins puts together a nice season where he's healthy, and then you feel good about maybe giving him another contract. Same with Tyler Boyd. But man, sure feels like we're going to be in this situation next year.
I don't disagree with your point about next year, because again, and to be fair, from a 1, 2, 3 receiver standpoint, at 30 years, 29 years, and 29 years, it is the oldest top 3 receiving core in the entire NFL. But I think that is a benefit for a quarterback entering his first season as a starter in game 1, is the first full camp with a new coach, a guy that plays. These guys all have very specific roles. They can do other things, but they slot now into very specific roles. We'll get into this in a second, but it allows what it sounds like Brian Callahan wants to do with Treylon Burks, which is to play him everywhere at every position and to use him as a mismatch guy. 22.6 miles an hour, according to Brian Callahan, the fastest player on the practice field, supposedly. No idea who else was or was not there, but that's what he said. So I think it makes absolute total sense. Now, I will say, to your point about the future, sure, we are in the cul-de-sac of Titans needing more receivers. We're just on a cul-de-sac driving around in a circle here. I'm with you on that. But the idea, to me, the idea is this allows you to bring Levis along so far to a point to where next year he can then bring somebody along with him. So you're using this, even if you're trying to win games, you're trying to develop Will Levis, you're trying to build the system, you're trying to implement new culture, you're trying to do all this stuff. You want Treylon Burks to see what it's like to be a professional, as another example, right, of Tyler Boyd being a benefit along with Ridley and Hopkins. But what you're doing is let's say Levis is like, again, I'm making up numbers here. Let's say he's 30% complete of what he's going to be. You need him to get to 100. Well, this year, he should take a huge step forward from a development standpoint and be closer to like a 70% finished product. And next year, if he's a 70% finished product at the start of the season, he's way ahead of where he is this year, and therefore you can afford some inexperience at wide receiver. So I think all of it is well done. I'm willing to bet you that Tyler Boyd, maybe he was out there asking for something, but I'm willing to bet you that he and Callahan, this was in the back of their minds at all times. It seems like.
Well, he played the market incorrectly. We talked about that he kind of played it correctly, but he's going to have to capitalize on it now before other receivers sign, and then 2 or 3 receivers signed, and then there you go. You limit your situation. Yep. So props to Rand for not overreacting. I think that needs to be said, and letting the free agency kind of play out to their favor. And that takes a lot of analytics, a lot of foresight to be able to do that, a lot of strategy planning and discussions to be able to do that. So props to him. I liken this wide receiver discussion to like, okay, you are going on a road trip and you walk out to your car and your battery has died and it's a business trip. You have 300 miles to go. And you just need to jump off the car and just drive that 300 miles because you got full tank of gas. You'll drive that 300 miles. And then when you get to the next spot, your final destination at the end of this trip, then you'll put a new battery in. And that's kind of like your wide receiver thing is like DeAndre Hopkins and Tyler Boyd are your jumper cables to get Will Levis headed in the right direction to get to his final destination. Then next year you'll have 2 new batteries to install or whatever. Even though there's only 1 car battery, but you get
I get your point. And Mike, I think Mike alluded to this with you guys on F words, which is that like you're getting Hopkins is gone, Boyd is probably gone, and you're in this situation, but you've got a quarterback who takes over games and becomes a guy who is in complete control of the offense. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but you guys covered it a lot, so I don't want to sort of dive too deep into.
I think we covered about everything you could possibly cover. And then the stuff that we covered yesterday was actually brought up by Bill Callahan today. So, it seems pretty good that if you watch just a little bit of clip, listen to Brian Callahan, and then go to and listen to F words, you'll get the whole full Treylon Burks, Tyler Boyd experience all wrapped up into one.
And I do think, like, and again, all the common sense stuff, right? Well, it pushes NWI down a spot. It pushes Burks down a spot. It gives him freedom to move around. It also removes pressure from everybody. And it's not like adding Ridley and I think I kind of drew a blank on what I was going to say, but Mike said something about how he zeroed in on Hopkins last year, like it was the only guy he trusts. That is just not I am evolving my thinking on evaluation of Will Levis because of what the Titans continue to do. You and I have talked a couple of different episodes where we say, all right, and we did this a little bit on Monday, where it's like, all right, I think there's a chance Will Levis takes slight steps forward, shows slight amounts of progress, but we're still not sure if he's like an elite starting quarterback or not. And what I think everything the Titans are doing is to attempt to give as few excuses as possible to the evaluation of Will Levis. I still don't know if they're there all the way yet, because we don't know what J.C. Latham's going to be. This time last year, people were like, "Hey, I think Andre Dillard could be good," and I was, you just don't know. You don't know. And but what it does,
I think everybody's expectations were that he would at least be average. I don't think anybody really thought he was going to be good to great, just average. And that's all. Sure. That's all you're hoping for from this offensive line. But it's not just J.C. Latham, right? It's J.C. Latham plus the combination of whatever is going to be on the right side, and you have Lloyd Cushenberry. I mean, for and then you got Bill Callahan, which helps all of that, right? You have an offensive head coach, and this is kind of was my thing, is that a modest step forward is not enough in the NFL anymore for quarterbacks, right? It's live or die by year 2, year 3. You got to know if this is the guy or not. And that window becomes quicker and quicker for you to make that decision. The deadline comes earlier and earlier. And this seems like a year, like I've been trying to, and maybe I've just not been eloquently doing it, but this is what I've been saying, is that like, there are no excuses for Will Levis, right? I mean, unless this entire offensive line just shits the bed like it did last year. But even then, the offensive weapons that they have are so much better.
Yeah.
It's going to be it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where, okay, well, you're not going to see as many rushers because you got so many people spread out that are worth paying attention to. So again, I think that it's going to be really tough for Will Levis to have an excuse at the end of the year to just have a modest, they
are building, they are slowly but surely sort of removing excuses from his season. I mean, that's what they're doing. Like, we didn't have a slot receiver. Well, now we've got one. Oh, we didn't have a move receiver. Well, now we've got one. We didn't have a left tackle. Well, now we've got one. We didn't have a center that we loved. Well, now we've got one. Like, they're just sort of like, it doesn't mean that it's all going to work and they're going to win a bunch of games, but they are absolutely removing the excuse element from Will Levis's season this year, sort of piece by piece. And the more they do that, the more I'm likely to say, no, you do need to have an answer about Will Levis by the end of the season. So here's the other thing that I think is interesting that I'm not sure a lot of people have talked about. And I think I said this at the end of last season, watching the Packers play, because obviously that's the team that I watch as a fan. And one of the things that struck me about Matt LaFleur and all the receivers they have, which are all very young, right? It's Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson. They're all a bunch of young guys. What they say helped Jordan Love's development in his first full season as a starter was that there was no Davante Adams. That sounds weird, right? Okay, he's a guy you can trust. He's a guy you can throw it to. But guys like Davante Adams, and I would say DeAndre Hopkins last year, you'll kind of get where I'm going with this. Like, DeAndre Hopkins not only is the only guy you trust, but is probably the guy with the biggest ego who wants the football the most because he's the guy who's the star. And that's okay because he's DeAndre Hopkins. Well, now you have 3 bona fide veteran established guys. Like, I'm not saying Tyler Boyd is better than DeAndre Hopkins or Calvin Ridley is like, they all have egos and they're all good players, but they're all pretty even from like an experience standpoint. And they're all about the same age. Ridley's making a lot of money. Hopkins has made a ton of money. Tyler Boyd's caught a gazillion passes. Like, there shouldn't be a guy coming back to the huddle that's me all the time. And I think that's where Jordan Love benefited from being free to evaluate just the defense on its own. And I think Levis now, I think last year, didn't have that luxury. He was locked in on Hopkins a lot. And I think now he's going to have the luxury of there's nobody begging for the football. There's no predetermined reads. There's no singular player that you trust. You now have 2 running backs, a tight end, and 3 receivers that you can trust. And, oh, by the way, it gives you flexibility with Treylon Burks. So, again, they've just removed all the excuses that Will Levis could possibly have.
Just to Derek's comment here, respectfully, Will doesn't seem like the type to make excuses. He's the ultimate competitor. We're not saying that the excuse that he is the one that makes excuses. If you may not have been around, Derek, on Titans Twitter, but the Mariota era was filled with excuse making for a quarterback that just couldn't put it together. In fact, there's still people making excuses for him today. Like, someone just put out a tweet the other day and there's like a bunch of replies. Still people making excuses for Marcus. At the end of the day, he didn't get the job done. Did everything go peachy keen 100% his way? No, but that's life in the NFL. And I think Will Levis recognizes that and knows that it's his time to step up. And I don't think Will Levis would ever go up to the podium and make an excuse.
No.
But for us that are, for the fans, for the media, for the fanalists, for the coaching staff, for whoever, those people are the ones that make excuses on the behalf of Will Levis. And that's where we're saying you're eliminating the excuses. Like, when you go and analyze the player at the end of the year, if JC Latham only allowed 3 sacks and Nicholas Petit-Frere only allowed 6 and Lloyd Cushenberry allowed 0, and you see improvement from his surroundings, right? If you see improvement from the offensive line, if you see improvement from the wide receivers, if you see that there's no real run game drop off between Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears versus Derrick Henry last year, but the stats for Will Levis and the growing pains he's still going through are still persistent in there. The stuff you saw from college is still there. That's when you can't say, well, it's because it's a new offensive system, or it's because, the wide receivers, we're dropping passes. The offensive line was really terrible. Those excuses for us analyzing Will and evaluating Will are pretty much drying up. And that's I think what we're trying to say.
Yes, exactly. It's not excuses that he would make or that he would use or even that we would use to analyze the team. Like Bryce Young, an excuse sometimes is the bad word for it. Sometimes it's reasons. The reason Bryce Young had a terrible year is because of his supporting cast. Like, that's the reason. You could argue the coaching staff, right? Like, there's lots of reasons why a player could struggle. Some of it's his own doing, right? I think the thing we're ultimately, this comes down to our conversation around Will Levis was figure out what he is, and to paint the clearest picture of him, you have to remove as many reasons for adversity. And removing those reasons is what they have done. They've added a Ridley, they add Boyd, they add Latham, they add Cushenberry. They have removed the reasons why a young quarterback could find some adversity or struggle. And that's ultimately what they're doing, which means they should have a clearer picture of what Will Levis is by the end of the year, more clearly than if they didn't have Tyler Boyd, more clearly than if they didn't have Calvin Ridley. And so I think that's ultimately what Brian Callahan's, one of his main jobs is, because he didn't draft Will Levis, is to develop Will Levis, to teach him the system, and to learn exactly what you got with every player on the team. Like, that's your job. And Will Levis is no different. So I do think the Burks flexibility is interesting. I know there's a lot of talk about trading him, but I think ultimately, I think there's too much potential there. And I know that's a majorly loaded word in this conversation with Treylon Burks, but there's too much potential to sort of like, I think, to quit on it right now. It doesn't mean that he's going to give you anything.
I don't think they've ever had the intention to quit on
I agree.
him.
I agree.
And listen, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I mean, at this point, with the addition of Tyler Boyd, they obviously aren't relying on him to reach his potential, but they are banking that he will and betting that he will, and that's the way to go. The people that want to trade him for 6th or 7th and pick swaps and all this kind of dumbass shit, and that's how you have to describe that is pure dumbassery at this point. It's like there was someone talking about the Giants signed Allen Robinson. Like, who gives a shit that they signed Allen Robinson? He's not that good anymore. And they're like, well, maybe we could trade Treylon Burks for Jalen Hyatt. Because Jalen Hyatt and Malik Neighbors are redundancy. Someone did not watch either of those players ever play a game. Like, I mean, Malik Neighbors is your yards after catch physical guy across the middle, and Jalen Hyatt's your deep speed guy. Yeah. And like, there's, to me, there's no reason to give up on him. And I'm going to tell you right now, the Giants aren't giving up on Jalen Hyatt for Treylon Burks. We got to live in some modicum of reality here. Treylon Burks, I don't know why. I understand this is their thought process. I don't agree. Don't understand why. But they really like what Treylon Burks has brought so far this offseason. Now,
because they weren't around the last 2 years.
Does that mean I think you guys should buy into this hype that they are spewing? The GPS. Listen, GPS stats are great just for transparency purposes and nerding out purposes. They're great, but they ultimately mean nothing, right? At the end of the day, don't buy into the hype until you see it on the field. And that's what I think you need to do. But do buy the hype or the smoke or whatever that this team is going to use Treylon Burks in a multitude of ways, in a multitude of fashion. They're going to try and get the best out of him in hopes that next year maybe they only need one wide receiver.
I see. That's where I agree with the Titans strategy here, which is the same thing we just said for Levis, which is create as little pressure and as few excuses for Treylon Burks as possible. And that is to create this opportunity where the depth chart is now sort of perfectly organized. You've got Calvin Ridley, you've got DeAndre Hopkins, you got Tyler Boyd. Treylon Burks is your backup to all three of them now. He can play all three of the roles, and he can fill in for all three of them at any moment. NWI is now your 5th receiver, which is what you want him to be. That's what you want. And then you have a battle for sort of slot between Phillips and Jackson. Like, everything is sort of in place now for Treylon Burks to focus on himself. And that's the only way he's going to find any success, is to focus on himself and football. And then to remove some of that pressure, the Titans have gone and done what they've done. And I think the right strategy from an opportunity cost standpoint, the value of a 6th round pick, or the value of Jalen Hyatt, or the value of a 7th round pick, or even a backup right tackle, let's say, the value of that, to me, if you're talking risk and reward, is not the same as let's give him every opportunity to maximize his own ability. And if at the end of this year he has not done so, we have 3 years of data that tell us that he just ain't it, and that's fine. But we're here for the first time. We're here with Will Levis. We're here with Tyler Boyd and Calvin Ridley. Let's see what you got. I still think that is a smarter strategy than almost anything else, because the upside and the opportunity cost of him actually fucking figuring it out is worth so much more than a 6th round pick, or Jalen Hyatt, or a 7th round pick, or a backup right tackle. That's just how I see it. And that's,
I agree. I think it's listen. There has been no bigger proponent of cutting Treylon Burks or replacing Treylon Burks than me. I mean, I will say that right now.
I'll back you up on that.
I've been all about, you can't go into this year relying on Treylon Burks. He should not be part of the strategy as far as the decisions that you make in filling the holes at wide receiver. He does not fill one of the main holes at wide receiver. And that's technically what they did, right? I mean, it was a long, winding, roundabout strategy instead of just being really direct with it, sort of, because, I mean, they did get Calvin Ridley, right? They did keep DeAndre Hopkins. And then you're heading into the draft. You're thinking, oh, they'll draft a wide receiver here. And then they wait till the 6th round to draft a guy that's nothing like Treylon Burks and doesn't fill any kind of role that Treylon Burks does. And you're like, okay, well, this. And then Brian Callahan goes out and says, he says, I think people read a little too much about the slot thing. He'll play there, but it was more of a Calvin Ridley will play there. DeAndre Hopkins will play there, but he's mainly going to be an outside guy. And then they go and get Tyler Boyd, who fills the hole of the slot, which again mitigates the use of Treylon Burks. And so they're not relying on it, but they're going to find ways to be creative and use them. You talk about what Tyke Tolbert said about Treylon Burks today. I don't know if you've caught that yet, but a couple of the people have clips of talking to him, and he talks about what he brings is his strength, his catch, his ball skills. And to me, that I think that is, it seems to me that Tyke Tolbert is really excited about what he can do, and he's watched the film, and he's like, I think I talked about this on the Jaquan Jackson piece over at Stacking Inbox about how I think actually Stoney is the first person to say this in this way, but it's like coaches and scouts but mainly position coaches are looking at tape and saying, this is what I can do. Here's what I can make this player. And that goes for not only the prospects that they're bringing in, like a Jaquan Jackson, but also about the players that are already on the roster, right? I mean, you go through a scouting process with a new staff, and they're going to tell you. So at some point, someone in that building, and I would venture to say probably Tyke Tolbert, with the way that he kind of was glowing about him, was like, hey, I can do this, this, and this, but I can't make him this. And that's fine. At this point, people are still trying to say, well, do you call him a bust and all this stuff? Yes, he is 100% a bust. Unless he goes for 1,500 yards these next 2 seasons, he is a complete and total bust. But that doesn't mean he has to be a bad player. Right. It's kind of like Corey Davis, right? Corey Davis wasn't a bad player, but he was a bust relative to the position. If you get Treylon Burks as a wide receiver 2, which is his ceiling, which we've talked about, I think all last summer, is that we kind of got the feeling that his ceiling was more Corey Davis than A.J. Brown. If you get him to wide receiver 2, that's still great value. Yeah, that means that if you want to keep him around after the second contract, you still have this year, next year.
It means he's a starting wide receiver. It means he's just starting. He's a starting wide receiver next to Calvin Ridley next year. That's what he is. And that would be
what the team needs.
That'd be a huge step forward.
So, I'm not betting on it, by the way. But
no.
I think that I think from what we know and what we've kind of heard about the Treylon Burks experience, I feel like this staff is a complete 180 in how it views Treylon Burks from the prior staff.
Well, and I think, honestly, like, they scouted him coming out of college. Like, they scouted him when they played against him. Like, it's not like they don't know about these players. They know a lot. But again, I think what they've done is they've created an even bigger house money situation. He is the top of the house money guys list, which is one of my top storylines going into camp, is what do these house money guys do? Whether that's Rashad Weaver, whether that's Caleb Farley, whoever it is, Treylon Burks is at the top of the list. If you get something from him, it's house money. It's found money. It's value add, whatever phrase you want to use. And now he is in a position where he doesn't have to have, there's no pressure on him other than like extend your career. Do you want to be a pro football player or not? Which is pressure, but that's internal. There's no pressure from, the outside world or from the organization. They're like, no, we're going to give you, we're going to be creative with you. And you're going to take this as far as you want to take it, Treylon. Like that's what they're at. And so I think it gives the offense tons of flexibility with Tyler Boyd. It puts every player in their place. And that's what happened with Boyd. And I think that's why it makes sense. And they did it for $4.5 million, which is exactly the number I told you on Monday. Okay. So quickly, from other things that they said today, Brian Callahan talked a lot about the offensive line already showing improvement in like shorts, which is interesting. We talked a lot about Burks. He specifically said we are looking to add an edge player and probably a safety as well. So they still have some work to do from a front office standpoint.
You might as well just say, yes, we're going to add a safety, because guess what? Unless you're playing one safety this year, you have to add a safety.
He said some interesting things about rookie camp where he was going sort of very clearly out of his way to say, look, these players are not ready. They're not physically ready. They're not emotionally ready. Like, he lowered expectations in a way that you don't normally hear a coach do. He's like, this is going to be an orientation. My message is going to be the same to them as it was to the veterans, but that like we know their heads are swimming. We know their bodies aren't prepared yet. We know they're not professionals. They need to be taught to be professionals. It's obvious stuff, but it is, again, just a moment of like, hey, let's bring the temperature down on expectations for J.C. Latham and T'Vondre Sweat and Cedric Gray. Frank Bush said the same thing. He's like, no, he was asked about giving him the green dot, and he's like, how about we get him in the building first before we go ahead and give him the green dot. So I think clearly lowering expectations was one of Brian Callahan's message for rookie camp coming up this weekend.
But you say that it's kind of common sense, and it's something I'm writing about James Williams that will be out on Monday for StackingInbox.com. And it's because I think we say stuff and we deem it common sense, but I don't think the NFL works that way. It's like, okay, you take James Williams, for example, and I'll tie this back into what we were talking about. Take James Williams, for example. Every draft analyst, everybody that's watched the tape, top to bottom, has pretty much said unanimously, this dude is a linebacker, right? This guy is built to be a linebacker. His best spot at the next level is linebacker. That's not what the NFL tends. That is not the likely trend or the likely thing to happen on most NFL teams. Most NFL teams are going to draft him as a safety because he played safety for 3 years, and they think that they are the ones that can make him a safety. How many times have we seen the round hole, square peg kind of player that never gets a chance in the NFL or never is put in the position to succeed, not just at the Tennessee Titans, but nationwide in the entirety of the NFL and the entirety of its history? And those guys are screwed because the team misevaluated them, even though it was clear as day. It happens all the time. So I go back to tie that into what you were talking about. Is like, well, lowering expectations, recognizing that the bodies aren't where they're supposed to be, the conditioning won't where they be, blah, 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 blah. Mike Vrabel was not that way. Mike Vrabel was, we're practicing hard as shit and we're doing all this stuff. So it's not as common sense as you think. But I do think that this is a good way to view it. And I think more teams should actually view it this way and understand this maybe ties into maybe Zach Woodfin's influence. But more people need to understand that unless you're Marvin Harrison or maybe a few of these other players that skipped out on combine testing, they're not in football shape. They're rarely in football shape. The elite of the elite in athleticism are in football shape. Your guys that hover around, and to put in relatable terms, your 4.59s or your RASs are around 7, mid to high 7s. They're not in football shape because they are not elite athletes. Doesn't mean they're bad athletes. Doesn't mean that they're bad players. It's just that is the way of the combine world. You're training for the combine, not for football. So I like that they kind of recognize and are upfront about it and not saying, well, we're just going to be going hard. We're doing the practices like we always do.
Just say it out loud. Just say it out loud. It's not like these are young people who have never had a professional job before, and now they're going to be professionally ready to play football players. Like it just say the thing out loud. It's okay to just say the thing. Now, again, being open and honest and offering details and insight is great for us in the media and for fans to learn about their team. It does not necessarily equal winning and losing. Like right. To be very clear, the fact that Brian Callahan is more willing to give us interesting information does not mean that they're going to win more games or that he's a great coach. It's just more interesting right now to talk about the team because he's willing to say the quiet part out loud, which is great and nice and refreshing. Tracy Rocker talked a lot about T'Vondre Sweat's weight this week or today. I mentioned Frank Dott talking about the green dot for Cedric Gray. Bill Callahan specifically talked about J.C. Latham being his left tackle, has zero issues or concerns about him playing left tackle. And then, of course, Zach Woodfin talking about, your hamstring asymmetry or your arms asymmetry and measuring the differences between this. And I think he said the phrase state of the art, actually, is a phrase that he used to describe some of the work. He is the director of sports performance. Obviously, the injury issues are a concern for the team moving forward. So I do think it's interesting details from a lot of these guys. We'll get to what Levis had to say in just a second, but is there anything of all those names and all those guys that spoke that stood out to you from hey, this was really interesting?
I think it was interesting about how Woodfin also. I do find what he said interesting about helping balance out. Maybe you have a hamstring that's 20% less than the other, and balancing all that out. That's great. I love hearing that. Even if it may be common sense among the sports medicine world, it's not something we've heard from. Of course, I don't think we've ever heard from the sports and conditioning or director of sports science before. And it sounds like he may be available almost every week. I don't know. But that would be really interesting or really cool if he was. But I look at, he also said about how he manages and communicates with players who train and do stuff on their own. If they are a 6 or 7 year vet and they have this regimen, what he does is that he says, I have to be just as good of a listener as I do a director. And so he takes in this information. He asks all these questions and just drills them. And not really in a manner. It's more of a fact-finding mission, instead of drilling them like a drill sergeant. It's a fact-finding mission. And then taking a step back and saying, okay, here's what this history has looked like for this player, this conditioning history, this injury history. Does he really need to be on the same plan as this guy or the same plan as the class? Does he need to be on a different path? And I thought that was really cool. He talked about setting his ego aside, a real hard time for the previous regime. So it's very interesting to hear that, in my opinion. I don't think really Frank Bush said anything very interesting, except for he word vomited like green dot like 15,000 times. Yeah. Ben Bloom talked about, he named, I guess, Thomas Rush as Tommy. He mentioned Tommy in the rotation at edge, and I believe that would be Thomas Rush. I just heard that clip right before we went on air. I thought that was, unless they're moving Thomas Odukoya over to defensive end or edge, which heck, you could. You never know.
You do need a tight end though.
Yeah, well, it's not gonna be him either way. And he mentioned Rashad Weaver. Now, he did say Rashad Weaver was productive, so that's obviously coach speak for I have nothing really nice to say, but he says Rashad Weaver's been putting in the work. He loves the youth, and if you go back to some of his Cleveland pressers, they talk about a rotation at edge, or I think at the time it was defensive line when he's defensive line coach, but they talk about the rotation, about having young players. He's a guy that really likes the young players, as far as being able to mold them the way that he needs them to be molded into.
Yeah.
And so I think that's Ben Bloom's the guy that needs a little bit more love from the press going forward. Okay. I think he's a real interesting guy. He's got really good pressers, really good answers. Easton's got a few that he's putting up right now from Randy Jordan I can't listen to yet, so I'll listen to him after this. But he talks about the difference between Tony Pollard's and Tyjae Spears' running style and what Dylan Johnson brings to the running back room. So those will probably be pretty interesting and good. I retweeted them without listening to them, so they could be dog shit. I don't know. But
follow Zach at F Words Pod, where he retweets things that could be dog shit.
Could be dog shit.
Quickly, let's shout out to our sponsors, of course, Sinkers Beverages and the Kingston Group. Make sure you remember both of those names. Searching for booze, you can search Uber Eats, Zach. We haven't done this in a while. You can search Uber Eats and have Sinkers Beverages deliver the booze directly to your house.
They'll drive so you can drink.
Yeah, there you go. Kingston Group, of course, as well. A fantastic local company in Nashville that will help you with any major renovations, home buying, home selling, whatever you may need for your home. They will take care of you. So make sure you remember the name, the Kingston Group. Here's the thing, the top storyline, and I know this is master of the obvious stuff, but we just got done talking about how sometimes coaches don't really do well with the obvious stuff. I think tomorrow, I'm very excited to go to rookie camp on Friday. And sure, we can talk about, I can't wait to see the size of J.C. Latham and the size of T'Vondre Sweat up close and personal. I can't wait to see, all the different things, right? It's all stuff that's
you
very
taking a scale out with you? You need
I'm going to bring, I'm going to bring out a digital
listen, I'm telling you right now, y'all, there should be a daily weigh-in for T'Vondre Sweat, just so nobody can exaggerate and call him 380 pounds. Aaron Brewer weighs 275 when he was really playing at 280, high 280s, 290s.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a scale out there that it's officially recorded in the books, right? It's officially recorded in the books that T'Vondre Sweat is this size right now every day. That way nobody can go out on the air on Twitter in conversations and say, well, you drafted a 380-pound nose tackle and you had a 275 center, like that kind of stuff. I implore the Titans to put out a public scaling.
It would be pretty funny actually if they did. Tracy Rocker basically was like, "Look, I'm a big guy. I got a big son. It's a struggle. You got to deal with it, but everybody's got to deal with it. Like you just got to deal with it." But my ultimate point though is watching all these guys talk today, and I did not get a chance to go out there today, but I'll be out there on Friday. And honestly, like watching Will Levis speak, at this time of year, right in May, starting rookie camp, it is going to be, and I know this is what fans want. And I know this is what fans are excited about, but it is a completely new organization, top to bottom, completely new, with the exception of a handful of players that are, Jeffrey Simmons and Peter Skoronski, I'm not sure even counts. 1 year on the previous regime, no, drafted by Rand. Like it is going to be jarring how different and new everything is for the organization. And what I am fascinated to cover this summer across all the different activities, whether it's rookie camp or OTAs or training camp, is just how does it all work and feel differently than the previous regime? And it's new quarterback in camp. It's a new general manager in camp. It's a new head coach in camp. It's new position coaches. It's new offensive line. It's new receiving core. It's entirely new secondary. It is a completely turned over organization. And what does that look like on like a tangible practice level? How are the drills different? How is the communication we've already seen very different? Like it's just so new that I think it's going to be jarring when we actually start to get to some of the things that are going to happen on the field over the course of the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is until camp. I am fascinated to see to feel my own reaction to how different things are. And until it's in your face, it's hard to tell. It's hard to know what it's going to be, but it is so different. It is. Watching Will Levis talk, I was like, wait a second, haven't I been watching like Ryan Tannehill do this for like the last 5 years? Oh, that's right, I have. And it's just weird to see a different person there. And so I think fans should be excited about that, but it also means there's a lot of questions that all these guys have to answer.
Going back to real quick to stuff that was interesting. I thought it was interesting. The back-to-back questions from Stillman about the right tackle position of Brian Callahan, and then it was followed up later with Bill Callahan. But I thought it was interesting that they were good questions. I can't believe it, but they were good questions.
That's why he's my mentor.
Good follow-up. And I found it interesting that they talked about, and you alluded to this earlier, but we kind of just brushed over it, about the tangible improvements that they have seen from what they saw on tape to what they see now from Jalen Duncan, NPF, and probably a few others in that, but those were the main names used, in the sense that they saw the evidence of improvement technique-wise, right? Yep. And I think that is, again, the whole point of Bill Callahan was to improve technique-wise. And he talked about what we liked on tape, or what we saw on tape, was both these guys had the physical athletic traits, which is what we have been saying. And it is about the technique. And it's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. No, everybody's expecting it to be perfect. OTA's day one, they shouldn't allow a sack or pressure or anything like that. That's what people are going to say. But you're looking for tangible improvements, and that's something that Bill Callahan talked about. Is like, it may take a while for us to get a right tackle situated, essentially, is what he said. We're going to have, it's going to be a battle that will likely go into preseason, which is, guess what? Probably the best thing is to let it ride that long into preseason, unless someone is clearly the best, right? Unless someone comes out clearly the best. But really, I mean, you're talking about, a fresh start. It's a fresh start for both those guys. And I think that giving up on those guys this early in the process, again, would I rather them have spent money or find a right tackle in the draft? Sure. Was there really a guy to spend money on for right tackle? Not really, but, that's just how it goes in the NFL. You're not going to find it in free agency, more than likely. I mean, everybody was on this Jermaine Ulafor campaign, or however, whatever his last name is, the right tackle from Vegas. And Jason Fitz was like, hey, I'm a lifelong Raiders fan, man. Glad to see him gone. Like, he was not good. Doesn't matter what PFF grades are. I'll let you know, because what PFF, and this is a great point, by the way. PFF grades do not take into account really the play calling, the situation around it, and everything that goes into it. So why it may look good that Jermaine Ellifore, had all these high or appropriate grades or whatever, average grades, whatever they were, it did not translate to what you saw on the field. And I think everybody looks at the NPF grades from his first year and ignore that there were games of where he was a great player and a great guy, and maybe great's a little too strong, but he was good. And here's the thing. If Bill Callahan can make good players great players elite, average players good, then it stands to reason he can make a bad player average. And that's what you need. Yeah. You need an average right tackle.
So just how many starters from 2021 are on the team? I got Jeffrey
NPF, right?
No. The whole fucking team.
Okay, so
the whole team. Jeffrey, okay, I count Jeffrey Simmons, I count Amani Hooker, and I count MPF, sort of. He sort of counts.
Chig, right? No, is that 2022? That's 2022.
Okay, well, go with.
Okay, so that would ultimately be 2021.
I mean, MPF wasn't there in 21. I think he was 22.
Oh yeah, so that would be 2022. So you went
So maybe I should just go with 2022 then, which is John Robinson's last year, right? The year he gets fired halfway through the season. The point I'm making is that the entire starting lineup, the general manager, the coaching staff, the front office, everybody is gone. Yeah. Everybody. They're all gone.
You got a lot of depth players from that era, but that is why, that's why John Robinson got fired, because all he did was draft and sign depth players.
Daniel Brunskill, free agent last year. Arden Key, free agent last year. Roger McCreary, rookie last year. Elijah Molden.
McCreary would be considered a starter from that draft class.
Okay, so Molden would be, again, a contributor, but was not a starter at the time. I guess McCreary was this is his third year. Yeah, I always think that he was a rookie last year, but he was not. But again, the point being, of the starting 22 from the Vrabel Robinson last year, 2022, there is, we can count on one hand the number of starters that are still here. It is as new as an organization can possibly be in a matter of 2 years. You've changed literally the most important pieces of the entire organization. And so that's the thing that kept hitting me today. There's great detail in here, right? Callahan talking about the offensive line technique, and, Zach Woodfin talking about how one hamstring is 20% stronger than the other, and here's how we strengthen that, and we don't want to be outside of 10% asymmetry, and all this stuff is really interesting. And it's all new because they're new. But it is top to bottom. It is an entirely new vehicle.
That means you have a lot to work. You have a, I don't want to say long road, difficult road or anything, but you have this situation where you present there is a whole culture that has to be built on the as well as, and this is kind of where I think you're also going into, and even if you weren't, it ties in really well what you're talking about. So you have all of these new players from different backgrounds, different walks of life, different teams, different experiences, coming into one place where there's a new head coach, new coaching staff, that some of these guys have never worked together and some of them haven't worked together in a long time. You have a defensive coordinator that's never been a defensive play caller. You have a relatively new GM in a new with giving renewed power, I would say, or new power. Then you also have, a new quarterback who's in his second year. But now you got all these players. It's like, on paper, this should work. But now you have all these personalities. You have all these different leadership styles that you are going to have to manage. So
how does it work together?
Who's the alpha dog, right? Like, who is the alpha dog that's driving the ship? And it's supposed to be Brian Callahan, obviously. But does his message come across clearly, effectively to everybody, from, the UDFA Dylan Johnson to high-priced vet and experienced man on the team. I guess the most experienced person on the team in DeAndre Hopkins. Like, that's a long, wide range of gap. And now listen, he surrounded himself with great coaches that will echo it, right? He's surrounded himself with Tyler Boyd, who can help in the wide receiver room, and stuff like that. But all this stuff, all these different parts have to work. And it's going to come down to this rookie class as well. And we're going into rookie minicamp. Is how does Tavondre Sweat take to this new coaching? How does Tavondre Sweat react to getting yelled at? Or how does JC Latham react to getting corrected and having to go through these growing pains? Is he going to get frustrated after every time Bill Callahan's correcting him? This is legit just new employee kind of growing pains that you have to go through. Cedric Gray learning to do the dot and getting the green dot and earning that thing. These are growing pains that these guys are going to have to go to, but they have to go to it because this team is still depending upon those three rookies specifically.
Truly, I know this maybe is like too media-ish of me, but like me, I'm obsessed with the psychology of leadership and the psychology of sports locker rooms and the psychology of culture for any business, but certainly a business where you have to, like, where it's as physical as the NFL is, where it's as high profile as the NFL is, where everyone's job is on the line at all times, and we can all judge your performance in real time. Like, it is just it is a mental pressure cooker. And to take this much new stuff, entirely new building from top to bottom, and how does it all work together? Communications and culture. I am genuinely excited to go out and cover, like, how does practice sound? How does it look? How do they communicate? Where does a guy stand? We saw this with John Robinson. He would stand in camp behind every drill with a whistle and a chaw, and he was like acting like a coach. Rand Carthon was the complete opposite of that, or is the complete opposite of that. And so that's an interesting dynamic that I don't know if it leads to wins and losses, but it is interesting to me. And so how does it all fit together is ultimately what will determine success or failure on the field eventually. Like, that's, and again, I think Will Levis, honestly, what I saw today, and this is partly why it hit me, is that Will Levis is standing up there like a veteran, answering questions like a veteran, and he's never entered a training camp as a starting quarterback before. Like, he's never had to do this. He's answer questions at Kentucky. It's not the same thing. Like, nobody lets their players talk in college football. It's totally different. The NFL is you're out there by yourself in the NFL. And so he had a little training session last year, but this is it, man. And I think he's white. He may not be an elite quarterback. He may not be accurate enough. He may not win a Super Bowl. He may not be great, whatever. But he is wired, to your point. This whole thing looks great on paper. We all know the games aren't played on paper, but this whole thing looks strategically aligned and strategically deployed on paper very well. Will Levis, wired on paper in the perfect way to be an alpha male leader of the culture in the locker room. That's the way he's wired. That's the way he's built. That's probably what he's done his entire life in every football team he's ever been on. And I think he's prepared for that. Does it mean he can, like, instantaneously read the fake coverage on the too high safety look and hit the window and the post corner to Treylon Burks? Maybe not. But, like, that's something we just have to learn. And
he can hit it. Just matters if Treylon Burks can catch it or not.
I know. I shouldn't have said. I knew as soon as I said Burks, I was like, oh shit, he's gonna give me a hard time for that one. Calvin Ridley. Like, can you? There's a difference between, again, the culture and the leadership stuff is utterly fascinating to me because it is so new. And Jeffrey Simmons is an interesting personality in all of this because he should be the Derrick Henry alpha male, Taylor Lewan alpha male. But he kind of has a different style to him, right? Like, he doesn't have the same kind of, like, rah-rah Will Levis type of energy. So I don't know. I think they need a couple of these guys. And
now do you say that because we see that he always leads the huddle or the game breakdowns, pregame and all this stuff, and it seems like he has energy during the game. Just, I guess, is he more subdued? He's just not. Practice? Or how many defensive linemen are real chatty Cathys in practice?
Just over the last few years.
I don't know.
Arden Key just runs his mouth.
But constantly. I don't consider him a defensive lineman.
That's true.
I consider him an edge player.
Danico Autry was very quiet, very quiet. Just sort of,
and a lot of people are banging Jeffrey Simmons' leadership because Teair Tart failed. Well, Teair Tart failed because of Teair Tart. Let's be honest here. And he can be the greatest leader in the world, but you ain't getting shit out Teair Tart or another player if they don't want. That's the thing of leadership, is that people think, well, you're only a good leader if everybody in America will listen to you. No, you're a good leader when you're trying to pull the best out of anybody despite them not wanting to listen to you. And Teair Tart was a guy. I mean, Jimmy Carter said the same thing. And he did not want, I'm done. I wash my hands of Teair Tart.
One of the dumbest things I think sports fans do, maybe NFL, maybe it's football fans, but maybe not. I don't know. I think one of the dumbest things we do as a society is say that the yeller and the screamer is the good leader automatically because you do a bunch of Ray Lewis shit. Like Derek Mason told us at the draft party, we would start. Many of us just started. Oh, Ray's talking again. Like we would zone out when Ray Lewis would go into his speech mode because we already heard it. We're professionals. We don't need it. There's so many different ways to lead, and Jeffrey Simmons leads far more by example. And when he speaks, I think it carries a lot of weight because every time I've talked to him, he's very measured with how he talks. He's very calculating, and it's very Danico Autry-ish in that sense. But that doesn't mean you're not then showing someone else how to do it. Now, do you need someone who's a rah-rah guy on every football team? Maybe you do. I think Will Levis fills that role very well. And it just so happens that he also is your starting quarterback, so it works out.
And Tyjae Spears, don't diminish the energy that Tyjae Spears brings. We saw firsthand that he was way more vocal and into that Miami game than anybody else.
Like Hopkins ain't that guy, and that's not a bad. It's not a bad thing. It just is what it is. Like you shouldn't be fake. I don't want my quiet, like I lead by example guy to fake it. I don't want that. So these are all the things that I find that are going to be like some of the most interesting stuff to track over the course of the next few weeks. Is like, well, is Arden Key more comfortable in year 2, and now he's a guy that's going to be more vocal, and maybe he thinks that's what he needs to be. Like I don't know. I'm curious. Amani Hooker is a great. I know I think you guys were talking about it last week, like about the green dot with Amani Hooker. Amani Hooker, from a vocal standpoint, is a very thoughtful leader with his team and with the press and with the media, and like he's constantly a great thinker and a great quote about a lot of stuff. So I imagine that is.
I think he has some of the worst press conferences you can imagine. He's boring. And listen. I think PK actually agrees with me because he was one of the people that was ragging on why is Amani Hooker up here talking. And listen.
Well, I guess I'm thinking more coming off practice field where you're one-on-one with the guy. It's less big setting, I guess.
And maybe that's the case, but I'm all for. Just Cedric Gray needs to be the green dot guy.
No, and I'm not saying that Amani Hooker needs to be that, but Amani Hooker is a guy who probably needs to step into a larger leadership role since he's one of only 2 guys that is like still a starting player from 3 years ago.
He's only one of 2 guys in the safety room in general. So
there's no other humans left to lead. All right, we got a question here from Michael, and I want to bring this up here to kind of wrap up. Sinkers Beverages, Kingston Group, Football Show, Zach Lyons, Braden Gall. Thoughts on the Titans being projected for one more than the Denver effing Broncos? Our over-under is 6.5.
Take the over. If you don't like it, take the over. That's where I'm at. If you feel disrespected, take it. And listen, I think 6.5, that's one more win than what you got last year. This team should get one more win than what they got last year, right? So, heck, that seems like good money. I don't know what the odds are, but take it. As far as whether I care that where they're placed in the hierarchy of the NFL, I don't care. That's just
I don't care about
power rankings. Don't do it for me.
Yeah. I don't care about that. I do think that Vegas knows what it's doing. That's the one thing that Vegas
sometimes
normally.
Chris Westling, who is a man much smarter than both of us, may he rest in peace. He was on the Around the NFL football podcast. He's was a fantastic, thoughtful writer, and he always said this: the people in the desert, they know nothing. They know what they have been told. They know nothing. And there have been plenty of years up until last year, Tennessee Titans were beating win totals. So I would take the over, and I wouldn't hesitate at all.
Well, they've built a lot of pyramids out of solid gold for not knowing anything. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, but it's listen. That's from when you kind of put odds as close as you do on some of these things, and it's odds on as many things as possible. Sure. And listen, the NFL Vegas is allowed to be right, but I'm saying is that I'm fairly confident that you should take the over on the 6.5.
I don't
win one more game than last year. Then what are you doing?
What's the point? I guess the only question, again, this is what I can't wait to find out this summer, is how does it all work together? Because there's a lot of people, and it happens for every, and this is not a Titans problem. It happens for every fan base, for every team. The pick by the coach or the GM to fill a spot or fill a hole, everyone assumes it works almost every time in the summertime. It doesn't matter who your favorite team is or what the move was. Calvin Ridley will work. JC Latham will work. So-and-so is going to work. So-and-so is going to work. It doesn't, the NFL is wrong all the time. Talk about being wrong. Personnel people are wrong all the time. General managers are wrong all the time. Coaches are wrong all the time. Media wrong all the time. They misevaluate. They get things wrong all the time. And so there will be something that this organization got wrong. We don't know what it's going to be, but I'm fascinated to see how it plays out in the summer.
I got a good guess, but let's save it. Let's have an episode where, like, where do we think the Titans went wrong? That would be a good episode.
Like project
what we think is the most likely scenarios that they failed to.
I like it
objectively.
I love it. Project the misprojections.
Yeah,
that's what I like.
I like it.
No, I like that. Thanks to everybody who listened, of course, and for hanging out. We do appreciate you guys. Thumbs up on the YouTube page, please. Give us a little thumbs up there. Give us a subscription as well. Make sure you check out all the other great shows across the network. The Gold Standard now live on the YouTube page as well, covering your Nashville Predators. You got Football and Other F Words. You got Hot Read. You got Music City Audible. You got Football and Other F Words, Paul Karski podcast, a bunch of things. So make sure you check it all out. And, of course, all the other shows across the network. We got Lamestream Sports on Fridays, SEC Football Live as well. So we do appreciate you guys. Sinkers Beverages and the Kingston Group, appreciate you for your support. Everybody out there listening, go support them as well. For Zach, I am Braden. We'll talk to you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend, everybody.